The garage door was so heavy that opening it was like opening the drawbridge of a castle, and it always took Arthur a few seconds to recover. He got down on his knees and took his racing car out of the garage. 800 horsepower in only 3 inches. All it took was imagination, and that was something Arthur was never lacking. He put his finger on the car and rolled it, adding a soundtrack of growls, vrooms and other noises worthy of a Ferrari. He also lent his voice to the 2 drivers that he imagined on board, and to their boss, who was guiding them from afar. "Gentlemen, I want a complete report on our worldwide irrigation system," he said, cupping his hands as if we were talking through a loudspeaker. "Right, Chief," he replied, pretending to be the driver. "And be careful with this new car, it is extremely powerful," added the loudspeaker. "Okay, Chief, don't worry," the driver assured him as he left the parking space and drove deep into the garden grass. Grandma pushed open the front door. She was carrying a large basket full of wet laundry to the end of the garden to hang on the clothesline. Arthur steered his car as it descended into the ditch and then chugged alongside the impressive irrigation system. "Patrol Guard Central, everything appears to be in order," the driver reported, but the patrol spoke too soon. All at once, an enormous and brand new tennis ball loomed out of nowhere, completely blocking the passage. "Oh no, directly ahead, it's a disaster! Patrol, what's happening? Report!" cried the chief, who could see nothing from his office. "It's a landslide!" "No, it's not a landslide, it's a trap! It's Bigfoot!" Alfred had just put his nose against the other side of the tennis ball and was wagging his tail as hard as he could. "Central to patrol, be careful of that tail, it's a dangerous weapon," warned the loudspeaker. "Don't worry, Chief, he seems calm for the moment. We'll take advantage of that to clear the road. Send in the crane." Arthur's arm was immediately transformed into a mechanical crane, with all the right accompanying noises. After a few maneuvers, Arthur's hand claw succeeded in catching the ball. "Ejection!" cried the driver. Arthur's arm extended and threw the ball as far as possible. Not surprisingly, Bigfoot ran after it. "The road is clear and we've got rid of Bigfoot," the driver proudly announced. "Well done, Patrol," said the loudspeaker. "Continue with your mission." Grandma, meanwhile, had continued on her mission, as far as the second clothesline, where she began to hang the sheets. Far off in the distance, on the top of the hill, a small cloud of dust signalled the arrival of a car. But it was not the day for the postman or for the milkman. "Now what is it?" Grandma worried. Arthur, unaware of the approaching vehicle, was still on patrol where new drama was taking place. Bigfoot had returned. His paws were on the side of the trench, the ball in his mouth, ready to be released. Inside the car there was chaos. "Oh no, we're doomed!" cried the co-pilot. "Never!" the pilot decreed in Arthur's most heroic voice. Arthur furiously wound the key on top of the car. Bigfoot dropped his bomb into the trench. "Hurry, Captain!" begged the co-pilot, "or we're all going to die!" The ball rolled along the trench towards them. Arthur pointed the car in the direction for escape. "Banzai!" he yelled, even though the Japanese expression was not exactly appropriate for the situation. The car leapt forward, propelled by the wind from the ball that was hurtling towards it at crushing speed. The racing car cut neatly across its path, like a fighter plane shooting swiftly out of harm's way. The ball rolled off into the distance, but, unfortunately, the car was now on a collision course with the side of the trench, which appeared to be an impassable wall. "We're doomed!" moaned the co-pilot. "Hang on," replied Arthur, the courageous driver. The racing car arrived at the foot of the wall and shot up it almost vertically. It flew through the air, landing on the ground in a magnificent series of spins before finally rolling to a stop. The chain of events had been sublime, almost perfect. Arthur was as proud as a peacock that had invented the wheel. "Well done, Captain," said the co-pilot, exhausted. "It was nothing, my boy," replied Arthur with the nonchalance of an old veteran. A giant shadow suddenly loomed over the little racing car, that of a much bigger racing car belonging to the sinister Davido. The larger car rolled to a stop, leaving Arthur's car trapped underneath. Through the windshield, Davido looked very pleased with himself. Bigfoot/Alfred trotted up with his toy again, but from Arthur's expression he could tell that this was not the best time for games. With a small whine, he dropped the ball, which rolled to the end of the asphalt, crossed under the real car, and came to a stop directly under Davido's foot as he stepped out of the vehicle. The result was unexpected. Davido stepped on the ball, slipped, fell, and found his arms and legs pinwheeling in the air. Arthur was on the ground too, but that's because he was laughing so hard. "Patrol to Central! Bigfoot has just claimed another victim," announced the driver. Alfred barked and wagged his tail. Davido scrambled up as best he could and brushed himself off. Angrily, he grabbed the ball and threw it as far as possible. A tearing sound ripped through the silence, and, at the same time, through the underarm seam of his jacket. The ball landed in the water tank, several feet off the ground. Furious about the damage to his jacket, but satisfied with his throw, Davido rubbed his hands together. "Your turn, Central," he said to Arthur vengefully. Arthur just looked at him without saying anything. Davido spun on his heel and headed towards the end of the garden, where Grandma had just hung one of the sheets lengthwise across the clothesline and was turning to get another from her basket. She found herself face to face with Davido. "Oh, you startled me," Grandma hollered. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said Davido, obviously lying. "Spring cleaning? Do you need a hand?" "No, thank you. What do you want now?" asked the old lady. "I wanted to apologize. I made a mistake the other evening, and I came to make amends," he said slyly. Once again, Davido whisked a piece of paper out of his pocket and flourished it under Grandma's nose. "Here it is, fixed! Now the paper is properly signed." He took a clothespin and hung the paper on the line. "You didn't waste any time," Grandma conceded, sick to her stomach. "Oh, it was a lucky coincidence," she said. "I was going to church like I do every Sunday morning." "And who should I meet there but the governor? You go to church on Sunday? That's funny. I've never seen you there," Grandma replied implacably. "I usually stay in the back, out of humility. I was surprised myself not to see you there this morning," he answered. "On the other hand, I did run into the mayor, who confirmed my deed of sale." Davido took out a new letter that he pinned to the clothesline right next to the previous one. "I also ran into the notary, and he validated the purchase," he said, hanging up yet another letter. "Moreover, the banker and his charming wife have hereby transferred your debt on the property to me." A fourth letter was pinned next to the others. Unnoticed by the adults, Arthur had begun to climb up the north side of the water tank. Alfred was watching from below. He did not look very happy about the situation. Davido continued to hang up letters. He was already on the 9th. "The surveyor who authenticated the property lines," he continued relentlessly. "And finally, the police commissioner who countersigned the notice for your eviction within 72 hours. He proudly hung up the 10th and last letter. "That makes 10, my lucky number," he added with sadistic glee. Grandma was vexed and speechless. "There. So, unless your husband returns to do his taxes or you settle your debts within the next 72 hours, this house will be mine." "You have no heart, Mr. Davido," Grandma finally managed. "Not true. I have a rather generous nature. That is why I have previously offered you a good sum for this miserable property, but you wouldn't hear of it." "The house has never been for sale, Mr. Davido," Grandma reminded him for the 100th time. "See what a bad attitude you have," he replied. Arthur balanced himself on the edge of the large tank, which was half full of water. The tennis ball floated peacefully on the surface. Arthur imagined himself as an acrobat. He squeezed his legs around the wooden edge and reached out for the ball. Alfred began to whine. It's funny how animals can sense an impending drama. And in fact, there was a crack. A small one. Almost ridiculous, but enough to send Arthur plummeting into the tank with an enormous splash. Alfred trotted off his tail between his legs. "Why do you want this tiny piece of land in this miserable house so much?" Grandma inquired acidly. "I plan to build apartments here, as you know, and I want it for sentimental reasons. This land belonged to my parents," the businessman replied coldly. "I know, it was your parents who generously offered it to my husband for all of the services he had done for the region. Do you really want to violate the wishes of your late parents?" Grandma questioned. Davido was clearly ill at ease. "Late? That's a good word. They are late, just like your husband is late, and they left me all alone, Davido said edgily. Your parents did not abandon you. They died during the war, Grandma corrected. The result was the same, he shouted. They left me alone, and so it is alone that I intend to conduct my business. And if your husband has not paid his debt by noon 3 days from now, I shall be obliged to evict you whether your laundry is dry or not. Davido lifted his chin, turned around, and came face to face with Arthur, who was standing there drenched from head to foot. The businessman clucked disapprovingly, sounding rather like a turkey when it finds out that it has been invited for Christmas dinner. You should hang him out to dry too, he added in a mocking tone. Arthur glared at him. Davido headed off towards his car, still clucking. He slammed the door, turned on the engine, and let the wheels spin, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. The little racing car was knocked out of the car's shadow, somersaulted a few times, rolled backwards a bit, and fell into the opening of a drain pipe. Davido took off, followed by his thick cloud, which settled over all the clothes that were hung out to dry. Arthur and his grandmother were also coated with yellow dust. Exhausted, Grandma sat down on the front steps. My poor Arthur. This time I don't think I'll be able to stop that greedy Davido, she said sadly. Didn't he used to be a friend of Grandfather's? Arthur asked, sitting down next to his grandmother. At first he was, she admitted. When we arrived from Africa, Davido couldn't tear himself away from your grandfather. He stuck to him like glue. But Archibald never really trusted him, and he was right. Will we have to leave the house? Asked Arthur worriedly. I'm afraid so, the poor woman admitted. Arthur was overwhelmed by the news. How could he live without his garden, the place for all his games, his sole refuge? And where would his grandmother go? He had to find a solution. What about the treasure, the rubies offered by the Bogo Metasalai? He asked, full of hope. What did Grandpa do with all that? Couldn't we use it to save the house? Grandma pointed to the garden. It's out there. Somewhere. You mean the treasure is hidden in the garden? Arthur asked. That's what your grandfather told me. So well hidden that even though I've dug everywhere, I've never been able to find it, Grandma confessed. Arthur was already on his feet. He grabbed the little shovel leaning against the wall and ran to the middle of the garden. What are you doing, dear? Grandma asked. Do you think I'm just going to sit back for 72 hours while that vulture steals your house from us? Replied Arthur. I'm going to find that treasure! Arthur energetically jammed his shovel into a small patch of grass and began to dig like a bulldozer. Alfred was delighted with this new game, barking encouragement and running in circles. Grandma could not help smiling. He is the spitting image of his grandfather, she remarked. Brushing off her knees, she noticed she was covered with dust. She got up with difficulty and went back into the house to change her clothes. A few drops of sweat had beaded on Arthur's forehead. He was already digging his third hole. Suddenly his shovel hit something hard. Alfred barked as if he could sense something. Arthur got down on his knees and continued digging with his hands. If you found the treasure, you really are the best dog in the world, Arthur said to his dog, who was wagging his tail almost hard enough to take flight. Arthur burrowed into the ground a little more, brushed his hand along the object, and pulled it out of the ground. It was a bone. That's not the kind of treasure we're looking for, you wild animal. We need a real treasure, exclaimed Arthur, throwing away the bone and starting to dig a new hole. The door to Archibald's office opened slowly. Grandma took a few steps in and looked around at the space. A real museum it was. She carefully took down one of the African masks and looked at it for a moment. Her eye caught that of her husband gazing down from his portrait. I'm sorry, Archibald, but we no longer have a choice, she said bitterly. She lowered her eyes and left the room, the African mask under her arm. Arthur reached the bottom of a new hole where he found yet another bone. Alfred pretended to be surprised too. Did you rob a butcher shop or something? Arthur asked him in an exasperated voice. Grandma came out of the house with the mask, which was carefully wrapped in paper so her grandson wouldn't see it. I have to do some shopping in town, she said. Do you want me to go with you? Arthur asked politely. No, no, continue to dig, that's a good idea. After all, you never know. She quickly got into the old Chevrolet and started the engine. I won't be long, she cried over the noisy motor. The pickup took off in a cloud of dust. Arthur was somewhat perplexed by the sudden departure of his grandmother, but duty called. He returned to digging.